Good evening, everyone. Where have you been? Who's been playing hooky this semester? Thanks for coming out tonight. It's a beautiful spring evening. For those of you that have been loyal participants here in Edible Ed 101, you'll know the last 3 or 4 Wednesdays have been cold and wet and dreary, and now spring is springing. We've got the rosemary in bloom, the bees are happy, and we've got a really exciting class for you tonight. I want to remind you about our no technology policy, which I understand the teaching team is going to be vigorously enforcing. So please give your full attention to our guests tonight. It's been an interesting week. How many of you, I think about 12 of you came and got some seeds from me the other day, and I just wanted to show you what's happening in my greenhouse. The sprouts in front are those habanaba peppers that Charlotte Douglas shared with us. Those are the little sweet orange-colored ones. So those are growing. And right after class last week, me and about 80,000 other people went to Expo West in Anaheim. And I realized when I got there that this edible ed class is just really getting under my skin. Because I just was seeing everything differently. I got there, there's this giant sign that says Natural Products Expo. And then I was thinking back to Urvashi Rangan's lecture about natural means nothing in the food industry, really. It has no official meaning. And then I noticed I was going down the organic aisles, but I noticed that there was only about 3 organic aisles, and everything else was not necessarily organic, which meant that environmental working group report from last week that said, there's 2,500 chemicals that appear frequently in food products that aren't organic. I was thinking, wow, here we are at the Natural Food Show, and the majority of the products may be actually conventional. And then I started to think, wow, there's so much product there. Do you know that the average supermarket has 50,000 SKUs in it now, shelf-keeping units? And, after looking at our systems map, I started looking at this dizzying picture of all the products, all these single-serve, convenient, and then I started to see this. It's all packaging and packaging waste, and despite some efforts to develop compostable packaging and maybe recyclable packaging, it's still a tremendous amount of waste. And then there were so many people at this show that I saw there were no restaurants available, so I saw people actually going on their apps and getting Grubhub and Uber Eats food delivered to them on sidewalk corners near Disneyland, and then I saw more of that. So what was interesting was this incredibly exuberant and well-meaning group of people are working on tough challenges to make food healthier, but at the same time they're creating a lot of challenges. But those of us that are entrepreneurs and somewhat pathologically optimistic, we see lots of opportunity there. And I happened to walk into a big hall like this, 300 people or so. It was a talk on regenerative agriculture, and I kind of meandered down the side, and lo and behold, there were 5 students from Haas sitting there. That was a good sign. So that's my report from the Natural Product Show, except I went back to one of those hotels, and I had breakfast, and I asked for a side of fruit, and I got that big, oversized strawberry, really red, really firm, really tasteless. But after last week's lecture from Julie Guthman, I just could never look at a strawberry the same way. I just thought, yikes. So anyway, I don't know if you're experiencing the same thing, but the more I learn from our special guests, the more I'm starting to understand how things are connected and also how much work we have to do to shift this food system into a healthy and truly sustainable and equitable, just system for us all to participate in. Quick announcement. We have a graduate course here called Food Innovation Studio, which attracts graduate students from across the university. And next week, next Wednesday in the afternoon, we're going to have a innovation hotspot spotlight, and the student teams who worked up sort of insightful research presentations about areas of the food system that are ripe for innovation, like blockchain and transparency, plant-based foods. There's some fish sustainability. Anyway, there's going to be about 6 presentations: food waste, full cycle waste systems. So if you want to come to this, please join us. This week, we're going to respond also to your feedback from us, and I'm really pleased to introduce you over the coming weeks to members of our teaching team who are all graduate students here at Berkeley, doing really interesting things as they relate to their education, their food, and their path forward. And this week, Maria is going to speak to us about her path moving from engineering and systems into public policy. So please welcome Maria Balcazar-Tilley.
Hello, everybody. It's a full house today. So exciting. So like Will mentioned, I'm a reader for this class, and this last weekend I had the pleasure of reading some of your essays and learning about how you're taking in all of these different lessons in the food and ag system and having conversations about it. So a little bit about myself. When I was an undergrad in your seat, I studied biological and agricultural engineering, as well as philosophy. I was really fascinated by food security, food access, food production, and sort of the role of technology in all of this. So that's what brought me to engineering. And so once I stepped out of my undergraduate degree, I moved on and decided to do a lot of work on food security. I was part of a team doing research on food security and sort of addressing what are the different factors that affect food security from a national perspective. So it was an interdisciplinary team. There were agricultural resource economists, engineers, there were rural sociologists, super interesting and exciting team. And it was so insightful because coming in as an engineer, I came in with the expectation that it was technology, it was production, it were all these different agricultural resources that transform a nation into a food insecure nation, a food secure nation. And it turns out that to my sort of shocking experience, it really was policy, it was inequality factors, it was politics, and it was conflict. The level of conflict that a country has significantly affects how food secure a country is. And so with that finding and being really passionate about food security, I decided to shift my career and shift where I was doing and move into public policy. It is my belief that food should be thought about as a human right rather than a commodity. And that's what brought me here to Berkeley. And so I'm a graduate student here at Berkeley. I'm doing my master in public policy, focusing on food security and food access for everybody. So what I'm doing today, right now, every day, is I'm very involved in the Basic Needs Committee. So hopefully a lot of you guys are familiar with the Basic Needs Committee. And I work doing a lot of research and supporting students that are facing food insecurity on campus, as well as homelessness. It might be a shocking fact for some of you to know that 30% of us students are experiencing food insecurity at some level during our degrees, and 10% of us might be experiencing homelessness at some point during our stay here. So this is an opportunity for us as a community to come together and support each other. So as you start thinking about what can you do for entering the food and agricultural system, and Will is very fascinated by food and agricultural systems. How can you enter into the system? That's a huge opportunity for you on campus. From a policy perspective, I have the pleasure of working on developing system maps, and I'm trying to map for my thesis the whole food and agricultural map, taking into consideration politics, policy, production, technology, and trying to identify leverage points. So for you guys, when you're thinking about your final report, there's a lot of opportunities for you to get involved. It really comes from the fork. Just like voting with your fork is a huge thing and is an easy thing that you can do on a daily basis. But it could also be getting involved and volunteering your times in vaccine committees or in different organizations, as well as if you decide once you graduate to take the opportunity to be more active in this space, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think this class really emphasized the multiple opportunities to get engaged and take action into the food and agricultural system. So happy to support any of you guys as you prepare for writing the final report. I'm always happy to hear your stories and how you're thinking about these issues and trying to get into this space. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maria. Gives you a little stepping stone to think about as you progress. So tonight, we've got two special guests, both veterans of edible ed and the ecosystem that is the Bay Area. And Samin and Shakirah are good friends, and when I reached out to them, they thought about the topic for tonight. And we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion in the food industry, a complex topic, but one that I think these two people really can bring a lot of thought and good intent to. I thought, maybe tonight, just for fun, we would show your trailer to Samin. Can we do that? If you haven't seen Samin, when I saw this Netflix show, I was smitten. So I'm going to embarrass her, and here we go.
Entire life in pursuit of flavor. I've traveled the world to explore the things that define good cooking.
Let me get some forks.
No matter where I go, the same elements make food delicious.
You're laughing and crying. Laughing and crying. That's pretty much the story of my life.
Salt, fat, acid, and heat. Just 4 basic elements can make or break a dish. The more I travel and taste the different cuisines of the world,
Wow, muy dulces.
the more I realize that good cooking is universal.
This is my... It's so spicy. Don't you?
Drink some beer. You okay?
Have you ever made short ribs?
Never.
And this is such a good lesson. It's a flavor bomb in your mouth.
Oh,
It's so good.
I'm just gonna live here now. Eat cheese and butter until I die.
Be thoughtful. Wow, be curious. Good cooking is within reach for everyone.
Shakirah just rushed over here from City Hall in San Francisco, and Samin came across town from Berkeley. So we're delighted. They're going to talk together, and then we'll converse over here with questions from you in a little while. So warm welcome to Samin and Shakirah.
Hi, thank you so much for coming out. It particularly means a lot to me because this is where I went to school, so it's really always, anytime I come back to campus, I'm like, I never in a million years would have thought I'd be sitting up here and that it would be filled with people who cared what I had to say. So, and I'm really grateful to my friend Shakirah for coming and sharing this responsibility and this time with me. And also, I think she has a lot to teach you. I also want everyone to know that even though Victoria was very kind, if we see you on a computer, we will say something. We don't mess around. So why don't you, I'll introduce myself and then I'll let Shakirah sort of introduce herself and then we'll talk about what we want to talk about today. But So my family was born in Iran, and they came to the States, to Southern California in the mid-'70s. And I was born in Southern California in San Diego in 1979. And my mom, I think she really believed that my family would always go back to Iran. And it was really important for her to instill in me and my brothers a sense of our culture. And she did that predominantly with our food and with the way that she cared for us in her shopping and in her cooking and in filling our house with the people around our table. And so that is the biggest sort of connection that I have to my own culture. But I grew up eating. I didn't grow up cooking. I've always loved to eat, and I think loving to eat is a really important prerequisite for being a cook or for being anybody who really cares about the food system. And so I wanted to be a writer, and I came to Berkeley to write. I was an English major from the second I got here. And I started, actually a CALSO, you know, like the first thing. Yeah, somebody said, someone was like, oh, there's a famous restaurant in town. And that kind of like went in one ear and out the other, and people were like, oh, that's where your parents should take you. It's called Chez Panisse. And my parents never came to visit me the whole time I was in school, and they definitely weren't gonna take me to an expensive restaurant. So I kind of like half heard that. And then the next year I fell in love, and my boyfriend was from the Bay Area, and he really had always wanted to go to Chez Panisse. So we saved up for 7 months. We saved $220, and we went and had this meal. And it really was a delicious meal, but more than that, I mean, I'd grown up eating very delicious food, so it wasn't like the most delicious meal I'd ever had, but it was the most extraordinary meal I'd ever had, because it was the first time I was in a restaurant where I felt completely cared for, and it was this extraordinary temple to the senses. I mean, even just like little bits of it reappear here, and like this, you know, the beautiful displays, and just the way the light reflected off the walls, and beautiful flower arrangements, and the way that like you would finish your, you know, butter, and the next butter would appear. And so it was amazing. I was 19, I'd never had anything like that. And the dessert was a chocolate souffle. And the server brought in, and she said, have you ever had souffle before? And I said, no. And she said, well, the way you eat it is you poke a hole in it with your spoon, and you pour the sauce in, and that way every bite has sauce. So I did that, and I took a bite, and she said, how is it? And I said, oh, it's really good, but it would be even better with a glass of cold milk, because it was like this warm chocolatey thing, and I wanted cold milk. And she kind of laughed. And later, much later, once I understood cooking and like the culture of fancy food, I learned that it's considered like milk is only for babies, you know, like if you go to Italy and you ask for a cappuccino or a cafe latte after 10 a.m., they're like, oh, you're American. Exactly. Yeah. And so don't do it. So I was like, as if she didn't already know I was out of place. I was very much making that clear in that moment. But so she brought me a glass of milk, and she brought us each a glass of dessert wine to sort of teach us the refined accompaniment. And I was so inspired, and I was so inspired that I wrote a letter, I went abroad, and when I came back, I wrote a letter applying for a job. I always worked through college, so I asked for a job as a busser, and I brought it in. They said, oh, you have to bring that to the floor manager. And when she opened the door, she was the souffle lady, and she remembered me. And I remembered her. And I think she was desperate, because she was like, do you want to start tomorrow? And so I did. And then, you know, your first job is like you vacuum the floor, and I just felt so lucky, like walking the halls of this beautiful place and watching the cooks cook just like the most extravagant, beautiful food, but so effortlessly, and like really to me they looked like celebrities. Like it was almost like if they smiled, like it would ding, like. And so I have a journal from that time, and within 3 weeks I was begging them to teach me how to cook. And it took me a lot of resilience, because they didn't really want that to happen. I mean, at that time, the restaurant was the best in the country. It was like every year winning best in the country, and like, who was I? And so I just kind of never went away. And eventually, like, they did teach me how to cook, and the menu there changes every single day with the seasons and with the like what the chef wants to make, and based on, you know, who's working that day and what they have to use up. And so every day I'd come in and the menu would be totally different and I would be very overwhelmed. And nobody ever looked at a recipe or a cookbook, and the chef would say, like, you're gonna make this, you're gonna make this, you're gonna make this. And sometimes it was Italian, sometimes it was French, sometimes it was Moroccan or Indian inspired, and yet everybody seemed to know how to make everything. And in the meantime, they'd given me this like stack of cookbooks to go read. So like what I was reading at home and practicing at home wasn't being reflected in the kitchen at all. And so over time, I you know, and I knew nothing. I didn't know the difference between cilantro and parsley. And so I just started to see these patterns of these 4 elements. And eventually I said something to one of the chefs and he was like, yeah, we all know that. Like, duh. And I was like, well, nobody told me. And I realized nobody told anyone else. So that really became the system into which I filed everything that I learned. And also it became the language that I developed to teach other people how to cook. And I got to go to Italy and cook there, and I came back and I was working in another restaurant, and I saw that the writer Michael Pollan was gonna come in for dinner, and so I wrote him a note and asked him if I could come audit his class here at the Graduate School of Journalism. And so he actually wrote me back and he said, come talk to me. And after some more like resilience, he like backed down and let me into that class. And he really supported me and supported my writing, and he hired me to teach him how to cook. And he noticed that I was obsessed with these 4 elements, and he really encouraged me to write this book. And so along the way, like, he wrote a book in which I was a character, and then the cooking teacher character, and that became its own Netflix series. And then that sort of led to me getting this opportunity. And it's what I think we really want to talk about today is opportunity, and how to get it, how to look for it, how to make it for people who don't really have a lot of it. And yeah, I'm excited to be here and chat with you guys, so thank you. Oh,
So I think I love the segue into opportunity, because I think a lot of my decisions and how I've navigated in the world, and we talked about this before, has been lack of opportunity. So I was born in the South Bronx to a 15-year-old. It was some of you may be too young to understand this, but there was a time they were like, the Bronx is burning. And I was born in a hospital while the Bronx was burning. But I made it up here.
And you look good.
Started from the bottom. Now we're here. And I grew up in Harlem, and both my mother and my grandmother were social workers. And my grandmother was a community leader, and she was a Black Panther. And that had a huge impact on my identity as far as pride and community. And, you know, we always were, you know, going to try to help folks or cook a meal for somebody or showing up at funerals or celebrating Kwanzaa. That's a real thing. And, you know, that had a huge impact on me and my sense of justice. And you know, growing up in New York City, there was 2 worlds, and I didn't understand that divide until I was in a talented and gifted program, and kind of got tracked into a private school on the Upper West Side. And I was like, what is going on? It was like the most white people I've ever seen in my entire life in my classroom. And I was like, you know, there's kids who take limos to school. I have a Metro card. Like, what? It was. I just didn't really understand. You know, I didn't know that our upbringing was, you know, poor,
could be so different,
or working class. I had no conception of that. I knew my community, I knew my family, and I knew that you know, my grandmother and my mother implored us to serve. So fast forward to college, where I went to Penn for undergrad. And that was
Girl got herself from Bronx to the Ivies. Come on.
And I didn't cheat.
Yeah. She didn't cheat.
Oh my God. Oh man. We're not gonna talk about that. Catch me after.
That's a whole hour.
That's
yeah.
a whole nother, anyway, but to say that was another culture shock, right? I was in this like big university, and I ended up living in West Philadelphia, and you know, I saw folks who worked at the university who looked like me, but didn't have the same sort of opportunity to attend, and that struck me, you know, not quite well. It was also really expensive to go there. You know, the price of admission was the price of my mom's salary. So I had to work and make sure that I could cover tuition and also feed myself. And, you know, I'm the eldest out of 5 kids, so we would just kind of go to the bodega or go somewhere nearby to scrape it together and make food. So I never really thought about food until I got to college. And then I'm sitting in like sociology, like 101, and my professor is like, there's these places called food deserts where brown and black people don't have like grocery stores. And I was like, that's my neighborhood. Like that's where I grew up, right? And it's not this like policy idea. These are real lives. And that kind of seed started having me look at my college campus a lot differently in my neighborhood and why things were the way that they were. And I started asking more questions. Because I'm kind of like a little agitator, I spent most of my college career doing labor organizing. I was trained with Midwest Academy and Jobs with Justice, Philadelphia, to do labor organizing. But one thing that I always came back to was, what am I gonna eat? As Maria said, 30% of kids on this campus experience food insecurity, and I think that's always kind of been the case in college. And I learned to cook out of necessity. And the cafeteria was really expensive, but I found a lot of solace from class and organizing to go into there's a little tiny farmer's market in West Philadelphia, and it saved my life. And the fact that I could just make myself a simple pasta and like save money and feed myself, that was like a really big sense of self-care, and I really carry that with me, and I still do. I always return to carbs.
I think that's going to be my next show. It's Carbs of the World, yeah.
We're all invited.
Yeah.
Okay. So I carried that with me, and I decided that, you know, after college, I was going to try to marry kind of this organizing work that I had been doing and social justice work, and potentially food. But you know, there wasn't edible education at that time. All of you are so lucky that path is so much clearer now. If you want to make food a career, food in media and in journalism or culinary or policy or politics or health. That wasn't particularly clear when I graduated, and I kind of had to find my own way. So I remember upon graduation, I got a fellowship with the city of New York, and I remember my manager, I was like saying like, this is taking too long, I hate city government, and he was like, this is the cyborg, like things will never change. So I just decided to, you know, work, but also link up with an organization in New York City called Just Food, and served as a community chef, and I was cooking meals in my community in Harlem at street fairs, and I loved it. I loved it, and I was like, man, this would have been great growing up. Until one day, this older gentleman comes up to my little booth, and I think I'm super cute. I'm like, oh, I have this like watermelon feta salad with mints. It's amazing, and everyone in Harlem's gonna love it. And he was like, this is all good and all, but you know, we can't. There's nowhere for us to buy these ingredients nearby. And my daughter just told me that she's a vegetarian. What do I do? And I was like, oh, you know, potatoes. I don't know what to tell you. So, I don't know. But it struck me again, these aha moments, like, man, like this is a systemic problem. It doesn't matter if someone wants to make an individual choice. If the system is not set up for you to be successful, you're not going to be able to do that, point blank. So, I decided that in order for me to get serious about food justice, that I would go to California. And my mom was so pissed at me. And I decided to leave New York City because I felt like all the work, like Chez Panisse or the folks at People's Grocery or Bryant Terry, and all these fantastic folks in Oakland and Berkeley and San Francisco were doing the work. And I was like, that's where I gotta be. So I moved here, and over the past 11 years.
It's been a long time.
Yeah. Aging. It's been phenomenal. I've done so many different things in food. I've like had an artisanal jam company called Slow Jams. Best name for a company ever, ever. So good, and taught myself how to preserve and had a successful business through La Cocina, which is an incubator for women-owned businesses in San Francisco, and does phenomenal work. And but I always felt like I never really got to travel abroad, so I applied for the Fulbright program to their master's program in Italy at the University of Gastronomic Sciences, and I was like, this is never gonna happen, and it did, and wow, wow, that changed my life, and I'm so happy to do that program. I now teach at that program, and teach food equity, which is fantastic, and you know, over the past 10 years, I've done everything from work on soda tax campaigns to helping youth organize around school food, to you know, being the community director at a local amazing grocery store and helping develop their philanthropy. But what it always comes back to me is it's never about food, it's always about people. It's always about people. And if we can change, the only way we're gonna change the food system is changing people and changing systems and changing institutions. And this is why I've kind of made a little bit of a switch in the past couple of years into politics and local government. So I wanted to take my organizing and community experience and channel that into change. And to be honest, not a lot of folks are thinking about food and food systems within city halls, unfortunately. And it's up to this community to start making those intersectional connections for folks, and so we can see the change that we want to see. So right now I work as a legislative aide to one of the district supervisors in San Francisco, Supervisor Valley Brown, and I feel so lucky that I get to live and work for the neighborhood that I live in. But we have a lot of work to do in the food community. So I hope today's conversation can be a start on what that looks like.
That's so awesome.
I was like, am I rambling? I'm like, okay.
All right, any questions? No.
And we're done. Yeah. All right.
Okay, so I mean, from where I have known you basically since you came here, and I've watched you go through all these different iterations, and I've watched you be very angry and frustrated and sort of like changing all the directions that you're going in. Mm-hmm. And I'm so curious from where you sit now. Also, everyone, Shakirah 2020. Ready? Okay. But from where you sit right now, like, can you point to maybe both one opportunity that really did make a difference, and then one time where an opportunity would have made a great difference for you?
Oh, that's a great question. And I definitely want to pose it to you
as well. Of course, yeah.
So one opportunity that did make a difference for me was, I'd say, when I worked at Buy Right as their community director. Does everybody know what Buy Right is? So for the folks at home, you know, Buy Right is an incredible independent food business that prioritizes good, clean, and fair, and has an amazing business model in San Francisco, and they're family owned. And I realized the impact that small businesses have on neighborhoods and cities. And I realized that these businesses don't have a voice in places where people are making decisions for them. And the biggest way I saw that was while I was there working on soda taxes. So we had 2 soda tax campaigns in San Francisco. The second one was successful. Berkeley, you all passed it first, and we see that it's working and reducing consumption. But on that campaign, I saw, you know, like how Big Soda would use Black and brown folks and businesses to kind of trot out their messages. I saw how small businesses who are on the margin, right? They're not making a lot of money and rely on these sort of these sales, maybe acting not in their best interests. I saw how people who didn't really understand food, but making decisions about food. And that, to me, I was like, that's so messed up. That's so messed up. And how could this conversation be different if you had people who were trained in service and hospitality, who understood food and taste and cooking, were in some of these rooms where some of these decisions and laws and regulations were being made. So that was a really big turning point for me in understanding how food and food justice is social justice, and a lot of these things are really intersectional, right? So if we want to solve for health, if we want to solve for housing, transportation, you know, campaign finance, I don't know, but you have to change, and food can be a really great way in order to do that. So that to me was like a light bulb, and an opportunity that would have made a difference. I think, you know, I'm still paying off student loans that I feel like they're so old they could vote. And, you know, the kind of hustle and, you know, work that we have to do in order to take care of ourselves. And no one is in good food to make $1 million. Like, there are very few millionaires in good food, and I'm qualifying that for a very specific reason. But I feel like, you know, I'm encouraged that, remember how I said when I was starting out there wasn't any clear pathways to do food or be in the food community? I feel like that's clearer now, and now it's a way for us to actually start advocating for better wages and better benefits and health care for people in food. I think that's incredibly important. So in addition to housing and the like. So, you know, it would be helpful to not have that sort of financial responsibility, but it helped inform my hustle. So I don't regret that.
Your answers gave me two things that I would like to talk about. One is that, so since the moment I started cooking, because I'm a writer, I always thought about writing about food. And to me, the highest place in the land, write about food, was the New York Times Magazine food column, which comes out every Sunday. And so for over 20 years, I have read that faithfully. And at one point I had a good friend who I knew was leaving her column. And so I got the email addresses of the I just Googled, you know, who was in charge of that. And I just blindly wrote to them and I was like, hi, I'm Samin. You have never heard of me, but I'm your next columnist. And they never wrote back. But but then a few years later, they did call. And
never give up.
And now I have the job, which I hate every minute of my life that I have a column, but don't get what you want. But this is all to lead up to the fact that when I did go to meet with the editors in their offices, I met with the editor-in-chief and one of the deputies and then the woman who edits my column. And we chatted for a while, and then the editor-in-chief and the deputy left, and I was left with Claire, my editor, and I asked her, I was like, how long have you been here at this magazine? She said, I think she said maybe 4 years. And at the time, there had been a whole shift there was a new editor-in-chief, sort of a new whole age of the magazine. There was a big turnover in the last 2 or 3 years. And I said, oh, so you were here before? And she said, yeah. And I said, how is it different? And she said, and she's of Colombian origin. She's not a white person. And she said, you know, my whole life I heard about people saying, oh, diversity makes a difference, diversity makes a difference. But until I was sitting at these editorial meetings every week with all these different people at the table, all different colors and ages and backgrounds, I didn't understand how it affected a magazine. Because there are so many different people bringing all their different stories and all their different experiences and viewpoints. And that really stuck with me. You know, the idea that it's a theory that we talk about diversity or inclusion. And there is a difference, and we should define the two things for you. But then there's the actual thing, which is it makes things better. It makes this magazine better. You know, so many of my favorite writers, the MacArthur Genius winning Nicole Hannah-Jones, you know, wasn't there before that time. So it makes it better. And that's really sort of stuck with me, that the idea it's not charitable to create like a diverse group of people, to be inclusive. It's going to help you make something better. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, I forgot. But so we'll come back. But do you want to?
But I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important. You said defining diversity versus equity, and I think what you and I always talk about and envision is equity. So before I think we tell folks on what they should do to create change, I think it's important for us to maybe do some visioning on like what equity
look like.
Yeah. So I want to know for you, Samin, like what does equity actually look like?
Well, I think a big part of something I think about all the time is not only like the makeup of a room, but also who has power in that room and who gets a voice and a say. And so it's not like, in fact, this morning I have a friend who's working on a show, and he called me, and he's not white. And it's his idea, he's the creator of the show, but he's also never worked in this industry before. And he was so frustrated because everybody in his, now I remember the other thing I was gonna say. And everybody on his show, like all the people in power, in more power, greater power than him, are like, oh yes, of course we want to have this be a very diverse production. But every time it like push comes to shove and they have to like get the thing done, they're like, oh, let's just call so-and-so our friend. He can show up and do a good job. And so every time, like, even though in theory, everyone's saying, yes, we agree, like we should have more brown people behind the scenes, more queer people, more women, then every time when the like push comes to shove, the people in power like keep that momentum going because it's what's easy. And he was so bummed, and I'm bummed for him too, and I fully have been there. And I was like, listen, like you do your best, you don't give up, and next time like you're gonna have more power, so next time you're gonna have a say, but you can't beat yourself up because you don't have the power right now, you know? And so he was like, I just don't understand because like they're giving all the director and producer jobs and editor jobs to white men, and then they have like a brown like an intern girl, you know, and an assistant editor who's black. And I just was like, I feel you, but that until, you know, we just need to keep going. And so for me, I had my own really difficult experience recently where I was making a project and I realized the same exact thing actually happened to me, where I was like very deep into the project, and I was sort of having on a daily basis a lot of frustrations about why aren't people listening to me? Why aren't they letting me do the thing that they brought me here to do? Why are these forces, these like unnamed forces that are not transparent, sort of like pushing me and pushing this project where I don't want it to go? And it took, because I'm sometimes slow to wake up, it took me very deep into the project, into the lifetime of the project, to realize that there's no amount of me every day saying, let's be feminists, let's create diversity here. There's no amount of like one person doing that will make change when an institution has been built, a system has been built to squeeze that out. So even though everyone else was telling me they were feminists too, and that they weren't racist too, when the decisions happened, the decisions were misogynist and racist. And so, and like every time I was the one and it's exhausting to be the one saying like, I'm sorry to raise my hand again, but this is not fair for brown people, or you know, and like it does. You don't want to be that person, but like you just have to keep doing it. And so, so there was something that you said about systems and the importance of changing systems. And for me, what I've realized, and trust me, like I wish this weren't my like reality, is that I have to go build it myself because it doesn't exist. What I want to participate in doesn't exist. And so that's one thing I really want to impress upon you guys, is if you don't see it happening, it's cool. Like go learn what you got to learn and then go build it yourself. Because when an institution, when the government, when entire systems have been built to squeeze everything out of people, to oppress like people who have historically had nothing, to not give opportunity to people who've never had opportunity, they're not going to change. There's no reason for them to change.
Exactly.
So let's give some actual examples of this in the food world.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Why don't you do it? Because I just talked a whole bunch.
Great. So, I mean, we can point to very easy examples. So if we look at who wins awards, you know, best chef, best restaurant within food media, that tends to be mostly men, mostly white men. The thing about that issue is like, you're like, okay, so they get an award. Awards mean revenue. Restaurants need revenue to survive, okay? It is extremely hard to run a restaurant. every dollar counts. And when you have that extra boost of fame and positive reviews, stars, and the like, and you have major foundations lifting you up as the best thing since sliced bread. I hate that, so I'm sorry, but you know what I mean. That means real money in your pocket and your investors' pockets, and in your dining.
And also more opportunity for you to have more business.
To more businesses.
And grow.
Right, and more capital. And that has a really, really big effect on where we eat, restaurants that are open, what cuisines and cultures
can charge a lot of money for their food.
Exactly. Who gets to work where. So we need to be super real about how, particularly in media, that has a big...
Looking at me.
I mean, you can come for government.
Yeah, that's true.
We can go back and forth. But as an example of how these things turn into like real power and privilege has real capitalistic implications on our food system. And that's straight up unjust, right? That's not equitable. And I think something that you said that was really important is like who has power. And one thing that I always say, and it makes folks feel uncomfortable, but I'm going to say it here. And if it makes you feel uncomfortable, I ask you to explore that discomfort. But in order for things to look more equitable, it means that we have to shift power. It means that white people have to shift or give up power in order for things to look different. You don't, it's okay. You don't have, but yeah. So, and I know that's something that's maybe hard to hear.
Or
like,
scary.
Or scary. And you're like, but like, I'm not racist. It's not enough to not be racist. You have to be actively anti-racist. And that is where you choose to spend your dollar, who you decide to hire, friends you decide to have at your dinner table, cookbook authors you decide to sign on to your, into your company, your publishing company, articles that you choose to write, neighborhood you decide to open your restaurant in. These are really big decisions that have real impacts and have really negative impacts on our vulnerable communities. And we have to have a real conversation with that in food in order for things to look different. Any sort of change, meaningful change has come through social movements and through revolution, and we have to prepare for that. There's going to have to be more of kind of a shifting or a giving up, or more not just allyship, but being accomplices in order to shift change. So we can unpack that a little bit more. I know it's a little heavy for folks, so maybe the first time you've heard something like that. But we want to make sure that we're being real as far as what equity actually looks like.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, what's interesting for me is I don't come from like a particularly underprivileged background. I would say like my parents were solidly middle class. I went to good schools in good suburbs, and like I sort of always found my way through. So I've had plenty of opportunity. I'm also like a professional opportunity seeker. So like I'm good at that.
Hello, New York Times.
Yeah, hello, New York Times. And so for me, one thing that I have faced my whole life is feeling very much like I don't fit in a white world, and being constantly reminded that I don't fit in a white world from just the basic way that people choose to not pronounce my name correctly, like on a daily basis, or many other sort of small indignities. And those, in a lot of ways, have made me who I am, and they have become, I think they're like really feed into what I view as my superpower, which is I have spent my whole life feeling outside and excluded. And so it is like my goal in my belly to never make anyone feel that way, to make sure everybody feels welcome. And what's interesting, what's so interesting, so I just went, I was in New York a couple weeks ago meeting with a bunch of different publishers to sell my next book. And a lot of them had done all these crazy data dives on me, really crazy, crazy analysis.
Wait.
That I had not seen, and they were showing me these amazing sort of Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure Netflix has this too. They just are very secretive and they don't share anything with me. But these publishers were like, oh, we've looked at all your numbers, your demographics, your followers, the people who Google you, the people who buy your books, all of this crazy stuff where I'm like, I don't even want to know where you can find out that stuff, but okay. And so, but then I was like, I want to see. So, and they said, and they kind of it was so remarkable because every single one of them said, your numbers are astonishing. Not so much that you have this like epic followership yet, but it's the fact that the way that this demographic spread falls is so unbelievable and unprecedented. They were like, the only person that we can think to line you up with to say that this is like resembles is Michelle Obama. And yeah, it's so crazy. And which was, I was like, what?
Are you my favorite
No. And so, and I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, she has this ability right now. She's like going stadium to stadium, speaking to like sold out stadiums of people who are buying her books. Why? Because she wrote a book that invited all of these people who have historically been ignored by the publishing industry, who historically don't buy biographies because biographies aren't written for them, you know? And so all of a sudden she's this groundbreaking person because she wrote a book about her own life that is like attractive to this entire part of the world that nobody ever considers as somebody. So it's not even that I kind of backed up into this like remarkable money-making place because I chose to not be exclusive, right? And that's sort of exactly what she does. And she has this way that like people who don't buy books, people who don't care about politics, people who don't care about biographies care about what she has to say because she's speaking to them. And so for me, like they say I have a remarkable breakdown of male to female followers. I have a remarkable breakdown of LGBTQ and people of color and people who don't historically buy books or care about food are buying my stuff. And so, I'm like, huh, that's interesting. It's really interesting. And so I keep thinking about like, what do I have? You know, a few weeks after my show came out, Netflix, I mean, it's like still mind-boggling. It's in 200 countries, 500 million people watched Netflix. And so it's too much to sort of like think about in your brain. You can't really, there's no way to process it. But what I can see, and what I had a feeling would happen and has happened beyond anything I could have ever imagined, is that people would be interested in the things that I was interested in. And so it was really important to me as we were making our show that we supported all of the people who supported us in making that show. And so I know it looks fancy and famous and expensive, but like it's a documentary budget. I'm not Jack Nicholson. Like it's not motion TV, you know what I mean? Like it's not motion pictures, it's not film Hollywood. I didn't have a massage on set. Like it was really, really slow, but like budget on a string. And so we didn't have like lots and lots of money to pay everyone along the way, which is really hard for me because I spent a lot of years not being paid. I've done a lot of work not being paid, and it hurts me to not pay people because a big part of opportunity is making sure that you're creating space for everyone. And there are certain industries, I happen to participate in two of them, media and publishing, and then food, where people are, especially entry-level people, are paid so little, it's an unlivable wage. So what that means is that the only people that can come do that have to have some sort of other support, whether it's their wealthy family, their wealthy spouse, or I don't know what, they won the lottery. Like, you know, or extreme sacrifice, you know? And like for me, it was not so extreme, but I did have always at least 2 jobs. And I had relatively like inexpensive living circumstances and stuff. And so, but what does that result in? A publishing industry where I've met with over 15 publishing houses and only ever met 1 editor who's not white. So, you know, it really shows up. And then you ask yourself, why aren't books being published for brown people, you know, or by brown people? And well, because there's no brown people in there to bring that conversation into that place. So I'm always struck by like, how do I create, now that I was the one that made it through, how do I pull the others up right after me, especially right after the show came out, where everyone was all of a sudden saying, oh, you're the next Anthony Bourdain, or oh, like I didn't set out to be any of that. Like I'm just here, I'm making my show. Like I don't even know what I'm doing next. And so it's all of a sudden, if all of this is coming at me, what do I do with it? Because it's a shot I have. And even before the show came out, like a book festival in New York invited me to come And they weren't going to pay me to, like, they weren't going to pay for my flight. They just wanted me to come sit on a panel. And they said, why don't you come sit on this panel about general cookbooks with these 2 other white women who are really great cookbook authors. I really like them. And I was like, I don't need to do that. Like, what, you want me to fly myself across the country and sit with 2 other white ladies? So I was going to already be on the East Coast. And I said, listen, like, I'll come, but only if you diversify this panel. Like, and I even did the work of sending them this list of, like, choose any of these people to sit on this panel with me. So I'm not even saying get rid of those other people, just add more. And they wrote back, and I said, and here's a list of moderators who could work too. And they wrote back the next day, and they were like, how about you go on this other panel that's the ethnic cooking panel? And I was like, no. And so then I wrote to my agent, and I was like, is it okay if I write back like the real truth? And she was like, okay, yeah, go for it. And and so I wrote back, I was like, listen, let me spell this out for you. Like, you invited me to be on the general cookbook panel. Up until now, as far as I know, I'm the only non-white author who's been accepted into the canon of general cookery. All of the other authors who write cookbooks who are not white, they get stuck on the ethnic cooking panel. And what do you talk on the ethnic cooking panel about? You talk about your identity and your family and where you come from. You don't talk about your work. So don't those people deserve to talk about their work? And if I'm the only one you can think of, shouldn't you be working to think of somebody else? Like, shouldn't we all be creating something? So I let her have it. And she was very embarrassed, and she did actually change it, and I did go. So that was, but I was like, okay, like, I see, now I get to stand up. You know, I get to sort of say this stuff now. And I was like, that tastes good. And it's not about taking opportunity away from anyone. It's just about creating more space at the table. So, you know, I always say, like, this is like, I'm like, true diversity and inclusion isn't when, like, there's, like, 1 black person, 1 white person, 1 Asian person, 1 brown person, 1 gay person. It's like, when I look at Twitter, when I look at food media, when I look at the articles of the world, and I just see so much white mediocrity, like, true diversity and inclusion is when there's all that brown and black and LGBTQ mediocrity too. Like why should only the most excellent specific outliers rise to the top? If there's room for all these voices, let there be room for all of the other voices too. And so for me, what that's like, as I sit here and try to figure out, like, what do I do with this? What do I do with this power? What do I, you know, I'm sort of just figuring this out. And I'm constantly testing myself, because I'm now all of a sudden holding up everyone else to, like, I recently was at dinner with all the Chef's Table creators, and I was like, I'm not going to talk to them. At first I was like, I'm not going to talk to them. I don't know. They're only making white men shows. And then, and then I was like drinking some cocktails, and I was like, okay, I'm going to talk to them. So I went over, I scooted over, and all the Netflix people were there with their phones. They were like, this is going to be good. They're like all recording. And I was like, hey, Brian. I was like, hi, Brian. I was like, give me your hand. I was like, Brian. I was like, you got to do better. I was so gentle in the way that I did it. He was like, okay. And then 6 months later, they announced this amazing new series, and he called me and he's like, are you happy now? And I was like, I really sincerely hope you did not do this for me. But it worked, you know, you realize, like, you have to say the thing.
Right. I mean, knowing you for so long and seeing your work and how you've grown and blossomed and excelled, you have always been a person, when you break a glass ceiling, you're always looking to see who you can pull up from the floor. And I'm super proud of you as a friend.
Oh, thanks.
And, you know, I know that you'll continue to do that. And I think you serve as a really great model for how we all can be thinking, and not even just when we have a little bit of power, but even in our day-to-day. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Because I think it's really important. And I totally agree. I feel you're saying all these things, and I feel very much the same way, like working on the 2nd floor in San Francisco City Hall. And, you know, I am one of the few Black legislative aides, and there are 11 supervisors, and there's 33 aides. And I'm one of the few Black aides on the floor. And the reason why that's hard is because when 50% of San Francisco's jail population is Black, or close to 70% of the homeless population is Black. But the people who are making decisions about solving those problems are not the ones making the laws. It's heartbreaking. And we have to show up in so many different ways, right? In our work, we have to build our full selves, and we can't like separate who we are. It's not like I'm a food person, and then I'm Black, and maybe I'm a woman, and maybe I'm, these things are always intersecting and acting as one. And I think it's really powerful to bring that perspective and make room, and also know like it doesn't always have to be me. So I just wanted to show appreciation for you for that. But yeah, equity. I think we laid it out.
Will, where are we? Like, is it time for questions?
We're like in a historic moment, I think. This is history being made, I think. Do you want to go to questions now?
Yeah, do you guys have questions?
We know we're going to do this thing where we slow motion walk over there. Everybody gets to stand up and stretch if they want. Okay. This is stretching. I can drink a glass of water. You can go over there. You can get a glass of water. I'll pull these chairs back.
Oh, great.
I'll sit with you.
Oh, great.
They asked for a stretch,
okay,
so we're adding a stretch.
Yeah.
And you can come sit. Maybe I'll sit in the middle.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
We didn't ever got to Vertime.
We didn't get to Vertime. It's okay.
We have maybe possibly.
Yeah.
Do you guys want some water?
Sure.
Yes, please. I don't know. This has been so great.
Thank you for giving us that platform.
Yeah. Oh, that was wonderful. Okay. If you have a question for Shakirah or Samin, thank you, Samin, please come to one of the microphones. There's a mic in the middle, and there's a mic up here. And when I ask you to ask your question, please introduce yourself. But this opportunity seeking and then having there's a word that comes from sort of my ethnic lineage called chutzpah. Do you have that word in your culture?
I just use chutzpah. Yeah.
Chutzpah. Okay, yeah, you've got it.
Yeah.
You both have it. Yeah, I mean and that is a sort of an energy to go do what needs to be done, to take action, to brave failure, humiliation.
A lot of it, yeah.
Yeah, but there's something that is catalytic about it. Both of your stories show that sort of inner sense of purpose that's just so inspiring, and I love how you both are seeing your work in the world as being so multifaceted. I mean, you have to do the work to put the food on the table so that you can create the table of invitation that you're doing. I mean, that's not a simple thing to do, but you're doing it in ways that take into account a much bigger picture. And I really loved what you said about creating the world that you want to live in, because that's actually going to be the final assignment for the class.
Oh, awesome.
Is to sort of describe that world and then talk about what you might do to get there. So, you have a question?
Yes.
And you also have a book that you look like you want autographed.
No, actually I don't want.
He just walks around with it all the time.
Yes. It's under my pillow every night. Yes. Thank you very much for your wisdom, your stories. My name is Kevin Longa. I have two questions, one for each of you. So one, Shakirah, I'd like to ask you, the Green New Deal is getting a lot of buzz. And you said the Green New Deal is getting a lot of buzz. And the last I checked, there's not a lot of food policy in it. And of course, we all know that food is integral to not only climate, but of economy, jobs, et cetera, exactly what you said. So I'd love to hear your perspective on the Green New Deal and how to possibly get food into it. I actually have friends in the Sunrise Movement who want to get that plugged into it. And then Samin, I'd like to know from you, I hear that the documentary team at Netflix is quite diverse, actually. And how has that affected your work there?
Great. So that's an excellent question, and I completely agree. And it's interesting to me because AOC, she comes from the hospitality background, and actually it's been really funny to see the GOP make fun of her being a waitress and a hostess. And I'm like, you try this job, right? I wish everyone had to be a busser, a dishwasher, a waitress, and have this sorts of experiences, because I mean, it not even just teaches you a lot about service and hospitality, but it teaches you about empathy
and humanity.
So there's that. I think a lot of our focus and I think everyone in here has the capacity to be an organizer. Everyone. And you don't have to be an organizer with a capital O, but there's lots of things you can do in your neighborhood and in your city in order to pass policies like this. So if you want to see a Green New Deal, start with Berkeley City Council, start with Oakland City Council, and start with San Francisco City Council. So what you can do is look at the legislation, see where there's pieces missing, and link up with food and ag organizations to lobby and talk directly to the legislative aides and to your elected representatives on what that can look like on a local level. California is amazing in all its progressive policies. There's that saying, so goes California, so goes the nation. We have the capacity to do that here as a state that is actively dealing with not even just climate change, but climate change refugees, right? We had the wildfires, we have crazy rains and storms. It's here and now. We don't have to wait. So any sort of these food and ag policies that you want to see, we need a new food deal, right? And that can include work collaboratively with our environmental justice activists, but I would say start actually on a local level. And I work for an elected official. Like, she's like, what's new? What's exciting? What are people talking about? What does the community want to see? And I have to go find it. So if any of you live in San Francisco and want to talk to me or find people like me nearby, I think it would be extremely powerful for you to model these sorts of policies, but start locally, because it's going to impact your life so much more faster than what we might see on a federal level. So thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A much lighter topic.
I mean, it's fun.
There was a whirlwind of events that brought me to Netflix. I had very little to do with all those decisions. And I was so lucky to end up there. And the head of the documentary and comedy studios, her name is Lisa Nishimura. I believe she's the only Asian American studio head in Hollywood. She's definitely the only Asian American female studio head in Hollywood. She is a remarkable and very special human being with incredibly good taste that everybody, you guys should Google her. There's been some amazing, amazing pieces written about her. And she, it very much top down in that organization. She has set the tone for inclusivity and diversity. And so I always say, probably of all the people at Netflix who worked on my show, like doing marketing and publicity and making the button that you click on or whatever, I interacted with about 30 people. 3 were white men. None of them were straight. Actually, 3 were men. They were white. None of them were straight. Everyone else was a woman. And of those women, about 80% were people of color. And I, not once, ever, had to say anything to them like, do you think we can change this thing because it seems a little bit uncomfortable? They just knew because it was coming from their experience too. And they were also from the minute I entered Chez Panisse, one of the things that killed me, and it was just like so amazing about that place, was that it was the first time I was in an environment where everyone was an overachiever, and I felt like I belonged because I'd always been an overachiever. And I really felt that same feeling with this group of people who worked their butts off. And it's really built into the corporate culture there. And I don't want to be some corporate shill. I'm sure Netflix does some terrible things. I don't know, but but from what I saw there, it was really amazing. And I know that they're paid really well. I know that they're given a lot of freedom and choice. It's called freedom and responsibility is like their company ethic. And it shows up in the way that the employees care about what they're doing. Everyone just like works their butt off there, and they care very deeply, and I felt so lucky and privileged to get to work with them. So it's an amazing thing, and it was really healing for me to get to see it happening in this like mega corporation, you know? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for being so open and speaking to the point. I really love that you're not sugarcoating anything, so that's great. I think that's the only way to get things moving. My name is Elena Lichtenthaler. I'm a visiting student researcher from Germany, and I work on food politics in China. One thing you talked about, and I noticed when I look into this room, is that I'm white, and I didn't even think about that before I came to this country, because in Germany, race is not such a topic you talk about all the time, which has history's reasons, but also I feel it's a little different in Europe, so maybe it's something we have still to get there. And also when I look around this room, it's still quite white, and it's definitely feminine majority. So I wonder whether you have any tips for people like me, who like have different experiences and sometimes don't see the things that maybe some of you have seen and others in this room have seen, where like, oh, I wish this white person would have done this, right? So sometimes things seem obvious for me, or not obvious, that I could do to like make a change and make equity happen and make diversity happen and still be part of it. And particularly for us younger people who are starting to get into jobs. And I think it's like, we probably, like you said, when you said like, I don't want to be uncomfortable, but let's face it, make room for other people. That's one way to make diversity, right? So maybe you have something else on top of that to share as an idea of what we could do, except just stepping back.
Oh, well.
I know you've got this one worked out.
That's an excellent question, and thank you so much for asking that. I would say, think of all the different ways in which you have a lot of privileges. So from your education ability to your physical ability to your whiteness and the like. And you know, one of the first things I ask folks, and actually my friend Nicole Taylor often asks this question on panel. She's like, when was the last time you had someone who was not like you at your dinner table? And part of my work with an organizing collaborative that I started called Nourish Resist, set to kind of change that dynamic, because you can have a lot of uncomfortable conversations, but use food as a tool to upset those sort of paradigms and make people come together. And food has always been a tool to do that, right? You had restaurants during the civil rights movement that would open their doors to everyone and create safe spaces. You have, you know, some of our most amazing revolutions within the LGBTQI community start from bars and restaurants like Compton's Cafeteria in San Francisco or Stonewall in New York. And food places can be where these conversations can start happening. And I think, yes, for sure, start on an individual level. But I don't want us to think about sexism or racism or you know, transphobia or anything, all these things as just individual problems. Because I think when we do that, people are like, but I'm a good person, right? I'm a good person. I would never do something to hurt someone. And that's why we say, look at systems, right? Educate yourself. Do the necessary reading. You go to one of the best universities in the country, there's libraries full of books that talks about these things for you already. So start at your dinner table, start educating yourself. There's a lot of existing groups that are doing trainings, like showing up for racial justice, like Surge, and other groups that specifically talk about what you can do, particularly maybe as a white person or as a man or as an able-bodied person, to show up in the fight for social justice. I think there's room for everyone to step up and step back. I also think that when folks do this work, they feel very guilty, and I don't think guilt is a very useful emotion, neither is apathy. So I would say, like, when you're doing this work and you're maybe feeling guilty or fragile, Please do not foist that upon a person of color or you know, someone who's different than you to help you figure that out. Connect with your peers who may be going through a similar struggle, and connect with them in order to work through those feelings. Okay, I think that's
yeah. And I'm just going to add one tiny resource that is, I think, really it's like the beginning of your education, if you like. There's an amazing audio documentarian named John Buin, and he made a series called Seeing White. His podcast is called Scene on Radio, SCENE on Radio, and I think it's like 14 episodes. And it's, I mean, I had done a lot of the reading and I knew a lot of the stuff, and still listening to it, the way he tells the story is mind-blowing. And it's so helpful. I'm listening to it for like the 3rd time right now. It's just a really, like, if you want to understand the systems that we're talking about, it's a great place to start. It's a great place to start.
So there's a lot of different ways to answer this question, and I'm happy to give more resource and talk more, but I wanted to give you a place to start. So thank you for being brave and asking that question.
Thank you. We've got a question from someone that's watching the live stream.
Oh,
so
cool.
Victoria's going to come.
Oh.
Are you going to act as the person?
I could use my male voice, but I will not do that. This is coming from Vincent K. And the question for either of you is, where do you draw the line when someone not of a given ethnicity makes food from that ethnicity? What guidelines should there be?
Ooh, can I talk about this?
You got it. I'm gonna sit there.
Oh, this is such a complicated topic. We can call it cultural appropriation, as like maybe the umbrella under which this all lives. And I have so many things to say about that. One is, I think, to me, cooking is a wonderful way to learn about the world and to learn about other people and to bring people closer together. So I think cooking food from any place in the world is a great thing that everyone should do. So but talking about power, going back to that question of power, and a lot of the time money is power, and credit is power, and awards are power, and attention and notoriety are all forms of power. When somebody cooks the food of another country, and it's not necessarily any other country, but a country or a place whose people have been historically oppressed or disadvantaged or colonialized or had everything taken away from them, and then a person who has not experienced that, or whose people from who he or she descends have not experienced that, then profits off of the culture and the food of oppressed people, I do find problem with that. I also think there are a lot of nuances in this conversation. I just came from Portland. I was there yesterday, and I spent the day with my friend Troy, who's a white man, and he owns 2 fantastic Indian restaurants, like the most popular Indian restaurants in Portland. And I was like, "What's up, dude?" Yeah. And I was like, "Let's talk about this." And he had so many amazing things to say. And I said, "Are any of you, like, does anyone who has ownership in your company, is anyone Indian?" And he said, "No." He's like, "Actually, no Indian people work here. No Indian people have ever applied to work here." He said, "Indian people comprise a huge percentage of our customer base. They love this restaurant. They're grateful to us for introducing the people of Portland to Indian food, and I go there multiple times a year to do this work and to study. And because we feed over 1,000 people a day, we're buying so many ingredients, so much spices from like a spice person in India supporting a local economy there that would otherwise he would be out of business without us." And I was like, "Oh, that's all interesting." And he said, "And just to draw a line for you, when Indian people come to the States, they're among the most highly educated and highest earners in this country. They don't come here to open restaurants in general. They don't come here to serve food. It's just not the history. And yes, they were colonized, but by England and not by America. And so it's just an interest." And I was like, "Okay, these are all interesting points." We had a really wonderful conversation all day long. I left feeling a lot better than I had sort of like when I originally asked him. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna do my own exercise, and I'm gonna come back to you in a year and we'll talk again. And I'm gonna think, what if you had an Iranian restaurant? Because Iranian people are also among the most highly educated and highest earners in this country. And so, and how would I feel if after my whole life of being told that like my food didn't deserve to be like, you know, charged, that we shouldn't be charging a lot of money, or people think we're terrorists or whatever, all the kind of stuff that I've experienced my whole life, to see my friend and colleague open a restaurant and become, you know, lauded for that and make a lot of money off of that, how would I feel? And I don't know how I feel. Like, I don't have an answer for that quite yet. Like, so, but it's, I think, you know, these are questions that when I started cooking almost 20 years ago, nobody was asking. And so I'm just glad that we're talking about this stuff now. And I think another thing we need to talk about is like why we think of certain foods from certain places as only being worth, you know, like a certain amount of money, and then other foods from other places as being worth a lot more money in the restaurant. And so there's an amazing academic named Krishnendu Ray who wrote a book called The Ethnic Restaurateur, and he sort of delves into all of that stuff, and that's a really great book if you have any more stuff you want to learn about that.
Great. You have a question?
Hi, I'm Jasmine Velasquez. I am an English major graduating this year, and I'm an amateur food writer. So I've been thinking long and hard about how media impacts food systems, and I really want to pose this question to you guys. Because media in all of its facets, books, films, media, anything, can change thousands of minds at the same exact time, I do want to ask, in what ways do you think food media could change our food systems for the better, since it has made some really disastrous impacts and some really good impacts? Sorry.
Do you have anything to say?
You kind of, I talked a little bit about that last year when you were here.
I did, because I have written for food for Bon Appetit and HuffPost and The Cron. I think stories are really important. I think people should be able to tell their own stories, and I think they should be given the same sort of platforms and opportunities to tell those stories. I think that's one way it could be better. I'm incredibly encouraged to see, you know, we have Soleil Ho, who will be coming to your class. Never has a mantle like that ever been held by a woman of color in the United States.
And now we have two.
And Tejal, exactly. And I think that's one way that we see food media changing for the better. And she's already, you know, causing a kerfuffle, which is like, yes, right? Like, these are the conversations that we should have. And like, you know, what types of places will, you know, she eat at and talk about and review. I think food media can do a better job of informing decision makers, like myself, like my boss, and other elected officials. You know, when we are trying to dig into an issue, you know, like farm worker, there's a housing shortage in California for farm workers. And the only reason why we know that is because of people writing about going into the fields, talking to farmers and farm workers, and writing about it. I think that's incredibly important. You know, there's publications in places like Civil Eats, and you'll hear from Naomi Starkman soon, that's already doing that work and making sure that folks like stakeholders and decision makers have really solid, good information, which goes directly into legislation and directly into policies and programs. I think food media is changing, and it's maybe having a bit of an identity crisis, but I don't want it to turn into black is the new black, right? That is temporary, and that is sexy and trendy, and that doesn't last. I wanted to create pipelines. I want writers to get paid more and sustainably, and I want writers to be rigorous and no more fake news. So I think these are the different ways in which I see food media make things for the better. And I'm talking specifically from writing, but seeing what Samin has done with her show and just little things like women eating and like not smiling and eating a salad, but like actually eating and enjoying food, right? like that is, I was like, I didn't know that I wanted that, right? And you know, as we're very visual and culture now, and using things like video to tell stories, and everything is so accessible. So I think food media should be responsible, and how it translate things that are on the plate, on the field, in a restaurant, to a viewer. So, and I think you have a really good example of how that's happening here. So, yeah.
I like that. I think also appreciating the nuances and being patient and diligent about, you know, going into the long form, the study, and also looking at the different perspectives.
It's interesting. Even yesterday, Troy said, anytime a journalist calls me and they want to talk about this issue, the first question I ask them is, how long is your story going to be? And if they say it's going to be 1,000 words, then I won't talk to them, because there's no way to talk about this complicated stuff in a soundbite. And you know, a couple things that I would like to add to what Shaq said is, like, I think, so one of the things, just to go back to Chef's Table, just because you know, they had put out this series of pastry chef episodes, and that came on the heels of all these other episodes that were very, very, very white, very, very, very male, and very, very narrow in their definition of what a chef and what a restaurant is. And so everyone thought, oh, cool, when they get to pastry, which is where historically women have been ghettoized in the kitchen, maybe they'll like talk about some women. And you know, they announced the lineup, and it was 3 white guys and 1 white woman. And I think maybe 1 person was brown, I don't remember, but like, people, it was very disappointing. And so somebody, you know, asked them a question, and they said, oh, we couldn't find anyone with a story. And I was like, what? Like, and so for me, if you can't find it, then you're not looking hard enough. Like, you need to go past page 1 of the Google results. You need, they exist, the people exist, the stories are there. A story can be anywhere. And I do like a practice for myself with my column, which I committed to myself a long time ago, that I just, when I took it on, I was like, I'm not gonna write about any white guys. Like, and guess what? There's plenty of stories. And guess what? No one's noticed. My editor never was like, where's the white guy story? Like, what? I mean, it's fine. You know what I mean?
Take care of that for you.
Yeah, like, it's fine. And it's not that I haven't, like, and it's not that I haven't come across amazing ones. Man, I've almost broken the rule for these little teeny tiny cookies called Baby Boos, the tiniest, best chocolate chip cookie. I was like, oh, but it's a white guy, you know? And like, I'll find a way to tell his story somewhere else, but not there, you know? And I think it's just, it's a little bit more work, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible. And I think that that's really important. So, yeah, I do have something I wanted to tell you guys that's not a question form, but it's a story, and it's something I'm really proud of. So can I share it? Of course. Okay, so when in the making of the show, it was really important for me that these producers that we had on camera, like I was saying, we didn't have money to pay them a ton of money, that they somehow benefited economically. And so in the lead up to the show coming out, I built a website with like links to the soy sauce in the show, and to the Parmesan in the show, and to, I don't know, everything. And the sort of group of people that I really wanted to receive some benefit was the hardest group of people to get that benefit to, which was the group of indigenous women beekeepers in Mexico, who were the most marginalized and oppressed people that we interacted with, and who I really wanted them to have a platform for selling their honey, which, like, a little jar of that honey goes for like $20 in Mexico, which is a fortune in Mexico, and then would be very expensive here. But all of the foodies who watch the show, people would buy it and they would get it. And so I hired someone, and we worked with them for 6 months to try to get them to set up a system for us to be able to promote that. And we couldn't, because I was in the middle of juggling everything else, and I just couldn't. It was really hard. I did get them to put up a donate button, which made me happy, and I think they've received some donations. But I was really heartbroken, because like the soy sauce sold out in 24 hours globally, like done. You know, and I saw what was possible, and I was so sad that they didn't get it. And in the sort of first deluge of like correspondence, I've gotten so much email and I don't read most of it, but like some guy wrote to me and he said, "Oh, can I come work for you?" And I was like, "No, thank you." And then he said, "Oh, well, I want to learn more about these ingredients. Where can I learn?" I was like, "Oh, here, go to this website." And that was maybe 3 months ago. And then last week he wrote to me and he said, "You know, like I was so curious. I just went. I went and visited all the places. I went and found the honey women, and I found the shaman, the like lead beekeeper, and she told me about how they have had honey brokers coming and taking advantage of them, because basically these cottage industries of like middlemen come and starts, you know, and then the women get nothing and like the middle guy gets everything." And so I was like, okay, cool, I'm gonna fix this. So he's like, I'm gonna build a fair trade like organization to import and sell their honey. And I was like, this is the best. Like it was all I wanted, you know. And I'd also just watched Period End of Sentence, which you guys should watch if you haven't. And I was like weeping, and I was like, how do I do this? And so for that to happen, I was so proud. Like that was the thing that I'm the most proud of in sort of the wake of all this stuff in this show, is that these people who gave us their story, you know, and who profited off of that story? Netflix profited, I profited, the people who worked on the show profited. The women got nothing. And so that's the responsibility of food media, is to remember that you're taking something from someone when you tell their story. So you have to make sure that they're going to get something out of it too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Reciprocity. Yeah. We'll come here and then.
Hi, my name's Betty, and I'm a human resources director in the food space. And I have a question for you specifically about this program is called Diversity and Inclusion, and there's this piece called Inclusion, which I think I'd really like to have addressed here. And I wanted to know, in the food industry, we are very diverse, and we pride ourselves in being diverse. We have lots of different kinds of people. We'll accept anyone who comes. You show up for work, you get to work, right? But there isn't a whole lot of inclusion. There's this sense of where you belong in the kitchen and where you belong in the restaurant. And I, as a human resources person, I'm really committed to creating policies that make people feel included. In other words, I think what's missing is really like, how do you feel inclusive? If you, as someone who worked in the industry and was a pastry chef in a kitchen full of men, there was a sense of I didn't belong. And what can I do as a human resources person to start the conversation around inclusion so that people feel comfortable in all the different areas of the kitchen and the restaurant?
I love this question, because you may have a title that sounds like unsexy, but like you wield so much insight and power within an organization. So thank you. And I hope more of you grow up to be human resources directors, because that's how you change a system and that's how you change an organization. So you can do this in two ways. Number one, you can start with language and culture. So I remember working at Bayrate, you know, we had a couple of issues with some of our folks who identify as trans, making sure that they felt comfortable in the workplace. And that is as easy as making sure everyone is clear on pronouns, making sure everyone is clear on on gendered language, and not even just for our staff, but also for our customers, right? And that was like a very, it didn't take too long, people stuck to it, it was in our staff manual, we had trainings on it, it was clear. And, you know, I think it made a big difference in making sure that our folks who identify as trans felt comfortable going to work, and that no one would misgender them or, you know, make them feel less than when we're all doing the same type of work. So I think language has a really big way of helping make culture. I think the second thing that can be done is working directly with upper management and also your leaders on developing pipelines and mobility. So it's one thing to hire somebody, it's another thing to retain them and see them grow within your organization. And I think HR directors and people directors have a really great responsibility to make sure that we're growing people within food, right? So when I start at your company, I might be starting out as a busser or starting out in front of house, but I can imagine myself in 2 to 3 years, no matter what I look like, right, or where I'm from, maybe I can be a manager, I can be an owner, or maybe when the owners decide to open up a new restaurant, that I have the opportunity to run that place. And I think it's really important to have owners who are thinking about that. Like, my growth and my expansion is the growth of my staff and the people who have been here and been with me. And I want to make sure that I'm creating those opportunities. So I think language, culture, definitely pipelines, focusing on not just hiring, but also mobility and retention. I also think that, you know, working, and this is hard, because I know a lot of folks talk to you about benefits and wages, and the Bay Area doesn't make that particularly easy for food businesses to do that. Hear that all the time in San Francisco now that I work on the other side. Things like, you know, parental leave, things like, you know, sick time. Really pushing your companies to have these sort of inclusive policies, so parents and young people and people who maybe don't come from more privileged backgrounds have a space in these companies as well. I think that makes a huge difference. I really wish I saw more food businesses who may be like a single restaurant or a single packaged food company, but actually pool their human resources resources together. I know that not a lot of companies have the benefit of having an amazing person like you on their staff. So it would be great if we could kind of cooperatively think about how do we bring this very necessary resource together from multiple different types of businesses. And I think in the age of Me Too, that's incredibly important. And I would love to see something like that if we think out of the box.
Yeah. The other thing as a legislative aid to bring to your attention is the issue of transportation for people in the food industry.
Absolutely.
This is a huge issue.
Yes.
And you know, it's like something that I know that in San Francisco, they've been having conversations about that, because not only can people not live there and work in the food industry, you can't get around easily, especially if you have a really early morning shift or a late night shift.
Yeah, you literally can't get to work. If you're a baker, I don't know how bakers bake in San Francisco.
Me neither.
And you live in the East Bay, you literally cannot get to work. But that's what I'm saying. Since I worked in the food industry and now I'm on this side, I knew that was a problem, but no one's really talking about that. So when I'm having briefings with the SFMTA, with my boss, I'm like, so, you know, restaurants are really impacted by this. You know, and we can like bring this sort of perspective that's super, super important, because like I said, food justice can be transportation justice, housing justice, and the like. But yeah, we really need to fix public transit across the Bay Area so people can get to work. I mean, like, straight up, like, I 1000% agree with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you say you were going to run Shakirah's 2020 campaign? Oh, okay. I think we need a cabinet secretary for food.
A kitchen cabinet?
A cabinet secretary for food.
Okay.
Right there.
I'll keep you all posted.
Elaine, you've got a question up here.
Yeah, I nominate Shakirah for the kitchen cabinet. I'm Sadie. I run a food company in Berkeley called Bread Seriously. And I wanted to share a story of something that happened to me today. We've been going through a whole bunch of production issues for the last 2 weeks where we had to actually shut down our production. The bread wasn't rising, it wasn't tasting good, it had the wrong texture, it didn't look good, and we couldn't figure it out. And I was going through a lot of frustration thinking like, okay, my dough mixer saw that the dough wasn't right and he didn't say anything, and then my bakers saw that the dough wasn't right and they didn't say anything, and then they baked it and they still didn't say anything. And I was at Expo West as well, so I was like, I don't know what's going on. People are trying to explain how the dough smells over the phone. This is like totally wrecked. And so I experienced a lot of frustration that my staff like didn't care enough to say something. And today I went to one of my bakers on Hill. My production staff are mostly Hispanic. And I said, I want to make sure that you feel empowered, you have a lot of expertise. When you see that the bread is like too pale or too dark, I want to make sure that you can change the oven temperatures, you can change the baking times. And he ended up with this huge smile on his face, and he said, thank you. And he was so excited. So what can I do as an employer to, I feel like the lesson I'm taking away is that I'm frustrated that my people are not making change and not speaking up, but they feel terrified to do that, even though they know things aren't right. And so we want the same thing, but we're coming at them with different vocabularies. So how do I lower that barrier to entry where people can speak up and feel safe about it in the workplace?
Do you want to take this, Samin?
I mean, the only thing I can think of is just communication. Like, hi, by the way, love your bread. I'm like, oh, I want to put myself in their shoes, right? Like, they probably are terrified. They probably totally know what's going on, but you're the jefa, you're the boss. And so why would they, put their job and their paycheck at risk by sticking their neck out? And so whenever I feel in a room like I'm a person in power, I go out of my way to try to communicate that there is room for you in that thing. And sometimes I do it to my own detriment. I come from a culture where I'm never supposed to sort of shine too bright or stand up too bright. But I think in those kinds of situations, especially if you are trying to get something out of them, which you are, feel free to invite, you have to just, it's hard. It's like these are the conversations that we're not brought up to have. And you have to have them every day. You have to have them every day. And I also think maybe a long-term solution is give them some equity in your business so that they do feel empowered to that it's theirs too. And that way when the bread's burning or it's not rising or whatever, it's their bread, it's their paycheck, it's their money. So, yeah.
Maybe sharing the lesson with the rest of the team and making everyone feel safe that's actually a wonderful thing to do is speak up. So don't keep it to yourself.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Hi. Wow. Thank you for being here and sharing your perspectives. I'm Elaine. I'm an MBA student here at. And one of the things we've been talking a lot about in this class is local and organic and the importance of that. But we've also been struggling with what about the cost of that? And Samin, I listened to your appearance on Call Your Girlfriend recently when you talked about how you really intentionally thought about focusing on diversity and inclusion over local and organic. And I'd love to hear more of your thoughts about, these seem like two different conversations, but maybe shouldn't be. And what are you thinking about that?
This is the rub of my life. Yeah. So, I came up in a kitchen and I've so deeply subscribed to the beliefs and the philosophy of Chez Panisse and eating locally and seasonally and organically in my own kitchen and in my own cooking. But as I've watched that message be distributed, I've also watched it not quite land with everyone. And I think what that does is it just harms the message long term. And so when I realized that I was going to have a platform, I had to figure out what was going to be my message. Was it going to be the same one? Or was it going to be more important for me to really make room for everyone? And I chose the latter. And I don't think at the cost of the former, but when I wrote my book, I didn't talk about organic. When we shot the scene in Berkeley Bowl, we didn't do it in the organic section. And those were conscientious decisions. And when you had that slide of that strawberry, I wish I knew what last week's lecture was about, but there's a strawberry story that I always tell that really sort of sums up what I think Alice's mission is really about. And I've heard this, so there are people in this room who maybe know it better than me, so forgive me if I get a detail wrong, but that she had been flown down to Chino Ranch, which is one of the longest sort of relationships, farmer relationships that Chez Panisse has had. It's in San Diego, and she had gone down there with Ruth Reichel, who at the time was the editor-in-chief of Gourmet magazine. And they went down there and visited, and they at the end of the day they gave him a flat of these Marat de Bois, these wild strawberries, which are like the precursor of the strawberry we eat today. They're tiny and they're misshapen, and they're incredibly fragrant, like the most powerful aroma of strawberries. And so they gave Alice this flat of strawberries, and she put it on her lap on the plane, and the idea was she was going to bring it and give it to the pastry people to put on dessert that night. And then they close the airplane doors, and the air starts circulating in the plane, and suddenly the whole plane smells like the most fragrant strawberry smell you've ever had, right? And so everyone was like, what's that? What's that? And so Alice started giving them away, because for her, all she wants is everyone to experience that taste, right? Like, she just wants you to have that thing. And that so deeply moves her, and that's what propels her in her messaging. And so by the time, naturally, that they landed, there were no strawberries left. And so I always think about that. What happened after? What happened to those people after? For me, I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, they had this one celebrity interaction with a strawberry or whatever, but they also probably had the most flavorful strawberry of their lives. And they probably were never able to go back to Safeway or whatever and just buy a basket of strawberries. And they were like, but where did she get that thing? So maybe they went to their own farmer's market, and they were like, oh, do you have a funny misshapen strawberry whose name I can't remember? And those conversations get farmers growing that stuff. And so, and that's how change happens over time, is people demand that thing. And so when I think about, what problem I'm trying to address in my work, I think about the fact that, like, most people don't even know how to cook a chicken. They're afraid to, like, buy a whole chicken. They buy a chicken breast. If they even buy chicken, because a lot of people are afraid of raw chicken, they buy, like, the package of plastic wrapped chicken breasts. And so if I can get you to just cook a chicken, like, then I've done some, like, monumental thing, right? And then you're gonna cook that chicken, and it's gonna be amazing. And then maybe next time when you go back to the grocery store, you're like, oh, what's that organic one? And maybe, like, oh, it's more expensive. I wonder why. Does it taste better? So then you buy that one. And then maybe that one eventually over time gets you to the farmer's market. And so you're having your own, like, sensory experience that's going to drive you there. But I just feel like it can't be my message to, tell you have to do a certain thing or do it in a certain way. And I don't know how those two things merge. I don't know what the answer. These are things, like, I spend all day, like, belly aching and heart aching over this, and usually I end up, like, with hopelessness, and then and I'm like, I don't know what the answer is, like, destroy capitalism. I don't know what the answer is, and so then I sort of just always end back at what can I do, which is the individual acts. And so I wish I knew the answer. I don't, but, like, I definitely invest in individual acts.
You got me to cook the Persian rice.
I think, this is a really complex intersectional issue. Where I stand on it, it's not so much who's eating local and organic, it's how it's sourced. So I don't really care if your kale is organic, if it's picked by folk by, like, slave labor. Like, I don't give, like, that's bullshit. Am I allowed to say that? I don't really care.
Too late.
So I think for me, and also if we look at what's happening in Central Valley and, a lot of commodity agriculture, the folks who are most impacted by spraying and, nitrogen fertilizer and the like are, brown folks. And that to me is shameful. So I think I would never tell, my family is that family. Like, my mom lives in suburban Atlanta. She has to drive to her grocery store. The only grocery store near her is Walmart. She does the best that she can to feed my siblings really well, and that's the best that she can do. I would, however, I would also say I think local and organic has been, as we see with Expo West, has been commoditized and marketed and sold back to us. And I think that's selling us certain ideas about our body, about whiteness, about health, that I think is extremely problematic. So I try to eat personally what makes me feel good. And that could be, this is maybe shameful, like that could just be like popcorn for dinner.
Yeah, I popcorn for dinner all the time.
Yeah. Or that can be, this amazing, spring mix plucked at the height of dawn by like, unionized
fairies.
Like fairies from, sure. We're incredibly lucky to be able to eat the way that we do in California. California is an agricultural powerhouse. I think that's amazing. We grow plenty enough food, but we need to distribute it better. So I think on that issue, we just pick our battles. We can't do everything, and I don't expect everyone to do everything, but I think it's really incredibly important to problematize it and keep asking hard questions.
Well, it's such a wonderful and inspiring transition, because I think, actually next week, Alice is going to be here with Bob Kennard.
Awesome!
So
you're in for a treat.
Yeah, so in a way, we're here because of Alice's chutzpah to get the University of California to create a class called Edible Education. So I just want to thank you both for,
thank you for
just
having us.
Being with us. Really given us all so much to think about, and really a lot of inspiration. And don't give up hope. Just keep going.
One chicken at a time.
And now, for you students, please stick around. Take out your electronic devices, and Victoria is going to
take a time.
Oh, I also, just while she's getting ready, I wanted to tell you just quickly, we've got a brand new center here at Haas called EGAL. Which is really interesting. We educate equity-fluent leaders to ignite and accelerate change, and it's a new program created by Kelly McElhaney, who's one of our really cherished professors here at Berkeley. And so, once again, Berkeley's sort of ahead of the curve in working on this. Go ahead.
There you go. You got upstaged by Kahoot.
Kahoot.
Yeah.
No problem.
All right, guys, sorry, I know this is like the least exciting thing to do right now, but so that I can mark you as here, please quickly sign in and then make sure that you actually answer the question. For people who are interested in talking to our speakers, feel free to come up. They'll be up here for about 10 minutes, and then they'll head out.